is saying the word, right? Everyone's saying the word AI and we need AI, but I like to say, what is AI? Like, explain to me what your definition of AI is. And it's so varied. I don't think people understand how it can integrate into all the things we do.
AI isn't the future, it's now. And whether you're in HR, sales, operations, or leadership, the choices you make today will determine whether you thrive or get left behind.
Today's guest is a digital transformation powerhouse with nearly 2 decades of experience driving growth through data, marketing, and technology. This man knows exactly how to turn data into action and action into results. So let's get into it. Tony Ferreira, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic welcome. I want to steal that for some of my other stuff that I put out there, like LinkedIn and everything.
You know, you could take it, you could run it through some AI. That was an AI generated intro. To be very fair, I literally copied and pasted your About You section from your LinkedIn and I threw it into ChatGPT and I said, write me an intro for this man.
Look at you using all the tools.
Boom, that's what I got. But let's dive into it. You have led some massive revenue driving initiatives. And I want to know, what role do you see AI playing in this next wave of growth-focused digital strategy?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I've been in a lot of different industries, but the one I'm in now is very different, right? Like very different. The company I work for, Wrench Group, is a corporate entity that owns 21 different HVAC, plumbing, and electrical companies. So when you think of digital transformation and AI, you don't think of your local plumber.
Not
or
at
your
all.
Local electrician coming to your house. But in supporting them and looking back to what I've done, AI is driving e-commerce engines and recommendation engines, things like that. But where the real power is helping these blue collar workforce do the things they need to do. So like a technician and embedding it into an application for them, or helping people get answers to all the technology that they don't know about. That's really where we're using it from a growth standpoint, is to support our workforce. But we're also looking at building a foundation to AI that drives everything we do, because we want to build it into more of the applications, more of the workflows and the operation type stuff. So it's just a very different view, which is kind of interesting.
Let's go deeper on that. What do you mean driving your workflows?
So we actually have multiple different streams of workflows, right? So we've got the feet on the ground, as we call them, which are the technicians coming out and fixing your stuff at your house. We have the people in the back end supporting them, like dispatchers and call center people and things like that. But we also have the sales folks, and then just all of the technology that underpins it. So it's multiple different levels that we're trying to incorporate it into, because from a technology standpoint, you may want to drive automated something with AI, right? But then the end user, meaning the dispatch person or something, they want to look up an answer quickly. So you have more like copilot agents that are based on internal knowledge, where they can ask a question and they're getting back information that is not specific to the web, right? And that's a big differentiator in our business, because we don't want stuff out on the web, because when you get web stuff, you get the good stuff and you get the bad stuff. And it's an aggregation of the two. We want to provide it with the right information. So it's all based on our internal information. And that's what we're building it to support those operations. And then we're trying to trickle that all sort of downstream. So a really interesting use case is a technician who's at your house takes a picture of your model number and gets returned the manual, the ways to fix it, the customer information, all of that just based on a potential model.
I love that we're talking about this, because it is a perfect example of how AI is really going to expand every kind of career, right? Not just tech workers, but the people who, like you said, boots on the ground, feet on the ground, and it's going to help them do their jobs better, faster, smarter. So I love that we're dialing into that. Where do you think that a lot of these companies today are under leveraging AI right now?
I mean, I think most people have dipped their toes in the water more with like ChatGPT, right? They're doing research, they're asking questions, they're getting information back. One of the challenges I see for a lot of companies is when you think about AI, the foundation of it is data, right? But when you look at most companies' data, it's all quantitative data, right? They're missing the qualitative stuff, which is what AI thrives on, like the unstructured data, the text, the prompts, things like that. But they're using just data points to drive an AI tool So it's not really pulling in the full picture, which means it's not doing everything it could. So I think that's where a lot of people aren't focusing, is their data, which is what it's all stemming from, right? They think their data is good because it was built 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's still running the company. But then they put AI on top of it and they're like, oh, this should work. And then they do it and they're like, oh, it worked a bunch of times. But then there's a couple of use cases where it starts to break down and they don't know why.
Yeah, the definition of data is a problem, right? To your point, some people only view data through the lens of what's structured, or did I bring someone in to look at all of our support PDFs and then create some, some data harmonization and kind of bring that in, right? And so to your point, AI requires a significant amount of context to get the best results, right? So when people say, well, I put such and such in and I didn't get back a good response, I would argue, you probably need to refine the prompt in the context of which you gave it, right? It's going to be relative. So to your point, if you're not taking the unstructured data to further refining or fine tuning or reinforcing what you're trying to do, then without that additional context, if it's just, numbers, or if it's just, plots on a graph, not the actual support agreements, the manuals, right? Example I had, this literally just happened, is my wife and I. I'm going to say my wife and I, right? But I think you can tell by the way I'm going to describe this okay, she's shaking my head. So we have these flush mount lights, right? And one of the lights went out, right? And they're LED based, they're not just a bulb. So it's like, hey, can you fix the light? And so I go up, I got some bulbs. And I'm like, sure, not realizing what we had agreed. We had agreed to do, right? And so I go in and I take the cover off. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. There's a problem. There's an LED driver thing, and I'm over here trying to take a picture of it, to your point, and I can't get the right angle so that you can actually see it, right? And so long story short, I ended up ordering the wrong LED driver from Amazon. And I got up there on the ladder yesterday trying to fix it to realize that it was the wrong one.
So the light's still out.
So it is still out. There's a lamp in the laundry room now, so I can still wash clothes. And then I went to Michael and Sons online, and they're going to come out on Tuesday, right? And so I could see how that pain point. I tried to take the long route, right, and I messed up, and I just gave up. So, yeah.
Well, and what's interesting too is like when you say that, right? Like think about all the things in your home, and a technician is coming out to fix a light bulb. Is probably what they know. So they get there and they're assuming I'm fixing a light bulb, but then they look and they see it. And so they then have to redo their thinking. And sometimes that requires return trips, which are expensive, or rescheduling, which is really expensive. So that's the whole point of trying to bring these things together.
Or call in your manager, because I've seen that where they have to call in someone else and they show up an hour later.
Yep.
Like, yeah, do that. Right.
So that's the whole point of like what we're trying to accomplish is, how do we create this where a technician could come out and the 900 possible scenarios that are there are on their fingertip? They don't have to know everything. You don't have to be the expert in everything. But once you get some of the answers, then you're like, okay, now I know what to do. Because one of the things we're also looking at is return trips, right? And I had this happen to me. My air conditioning went out in the summertime. It was like 11 o'clock at night. It was a storm. And I was like, dude, what can you do? And he's like, oh, it's a capacitor. I think there's one on the truck, but I'm not sure. We got lucky. There was one on the truck. But if there's not, they have to go back. They have to order it. It could be weeks, right? So what we're trying to create now is a platform where when you sit there, the tool tells you, is it on your truck based on the inventory that was put on your truck that day? And if not, you can one-touch order it all in one location and have an expected arrival date to then schedule for somebody. So that you're like, okay, it might be like 2 weeks, but it's exactly 2 weeks to the day, and then you have it.
I imagine that because of AI, you're able to create that type of application for a fraction of the costs that you would have had to do previously, or like why? What about AI makes that enables you to be able to create an application like that?
I think it's a mix of two things, right? It's the resources needed, because when you build things like that, there's a lot of expertise, singular expertise that's needed, right? Like part of it is maybe app development. Part of it is the AI modeling. Part of it is whatever other application you're trying to incorporate into it. And what AI has done for us is instead of it being 6 people, we have 2. Because if they lack the knowledge, they can look into AI and get the answers that then tell them how to do the things they need to do based on what they were told from it. And then the QA of the actual application, we've used AI for that too. So we've said like, here's what the code we're writing. Here's the application. Here's all the scenarios. Is this right? Is this going to run in these types of things? And it would give us like an 80 to 90% confidence that like what we're going to deploy is right, rather than running the 19 different cycles and iterations that it would take to like get to the good example.
I could imagine down the road, me being a consumer, right? I can say, hey, what percentage of what you're trying to do next is this actually going to be effective? And show me through your AI tool or whatever, right? Because I've been in situations where, well, I'm going to try this, then I'm going to try that, I'm going to try something else. 3 hours later, I still have no air condition, right? To that point. And so as we start to adopt, one of my kind of bigger points I talk to folks, I said, as humans, same thing happened back, if you go all the way back to when the internet was first introduced in the late 90s, people would say, there's no way that anyone's going to buy anything over the internet, right? Anytime someone says technology never, you just put a stopwatch on it, right? Because pretty soon it's going to be broken, right? And so the idea that no one was ever going to do that, right? And so the point being that as we start to adopt these technologies and get used to it and have that consumer expectation, you're going to start to see it. And you're going to be judged by it. Like pretty soon, the technicians, the trade folks are going to be asked, like, yeah, okay, prove it. You told me that you need to do this. Show me. I put this, and then you're going to have, just like what people do and treat doctors, like I was on WebMD,
Oh my God.
I'm pretty sure I need to have my knee replaced.
Right.
Right. No.
They're like, no, you have a mosquito bite.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and think about too, I mean, it's interesting because one of the statements I make to all the companies we work with is when it comes to digital experience, it doesn't matter what the consumer is buying. They expect Amazon.
Correct.
Everybody. I don't care if it's shoes. I don't care if it's meat. I don't care if it's your HVAC system went out. They expect the exact same experience from a digital standpoint because people got spoiled. Yep. Same thing is coming with AI. Like they haven't had it yet, but once it's ingrained, it's going to change the consumer experience and expectations. Where today, where they want personalized experiences, in about 10 years, they're going to be like, what is your AI doing behind the scene to do this? Or like, to your point, show me that this is the right path that we should go down, or show me options
Right.
that I can choose from of what I want to do. Because like, if you think about it in my industry, a new water heater, thousands of dollars to implement that. Which one should you choose? Tankless, not tankless, gas-driven, electric? They're going to want to see those options so that they can make a better choice, which I think is going to help them. Because right now it's all anecdotal, right? It's opinion. You should do this because of this. And we just say, okay, you're the expert. But soon that expertise will transition to a tool that people can leverage and say, actually, I should do this one or pick the right one for them.
Do you feel like people in your organization are really leaning in to AI and incorporating it in their jobs to the level that they can? Or do you feel like there's more hesitation?
Everyone is saying the word, right? Everyone's saying the word AI and we need AI. But I like to say, what is AI? Like, explain to me what your definition of AI is. And it's so varied. I don't think people understand how it can integrate into all the things we do.
So what is your definition of AI?
I try not to define it only because it's so vast. I mean, it's so varied. To me, what it is it's the incorporation of data as a foundation to automate certain things. And that's really high level. That's very generic, but that's how I see it, because if you use it for research, it's very different. If you use it to drive an application, the definition is even more different, right? So I think it changes depending upon its use case in that scenario. But to your point, I don't think people are, like, especially in our industry, like, again, people are saying the word, they're using it more from like, help me write this email better.
Right.
Can you look over this? Not like,
I hear that,
drive
like
business.
that. I think that most people, right, and this is my gut feeling, that most people, when they're out and, if they're out at a restaurant, because I hear these conversations, that people having coffee and they're talking about ChatGPT, others, they're really talking about generative AI, which is a subset of machine learning, right? To Tony's point, you have traditional machine learning, predictive analytics and things like that. You have deep learning, neural networks and people trying to create implants in brains, right? There's robotics, but I would say the general sense ever since November of 22 when ChatGPT, went viral for that initial launch, it's been more generative. Like, what can I create through my phone or through my desktop, right? How can I use it on an individual level? Now, as companies start to adopt it more, they're trying to figure out different use cases, right? You have, AI assistants, you have automated workflows, you have agentic AI, right? That's completing full tasks, right, for you. And so there's just so many different things. But I think at the end of the day, what Erica and I are trying to do is we're trying to move people from anxious to curious, right, at a minimum. And so I think by defining it or creating more AI literacy could be very helpful, right? Because if you allow folks to go and say, well, how do you define it? There's no telling what you come back or what they've heard, right? And our whole point of AI Voice of Victim is to basically empower more folks so that they understand how, I say ride the wave or get crushed by it, right? Like there's no real in between. And that tsunami is coming very quickly here, right? And so it's very exciting to see how other industries, because a lot of people that we talk to are more like knowledge workers. But my brother-in-law works for a roofing company. They're using it, a small roofing company, and they've been using it since last year. Right. And so I think people need to understand it's a much more widely adopted, both at the business community level, not just the big companies, not just the big tech companies. So it is very exciting to see how other folks are getting these operational gains out of using it.
And it's cost. That's the interesting thing. Like if you think of big companies, they're looking at it because they can spend the money on it. But when you look at companies like ours, we're looking at it on how do we save money with it? Like it's reducing the amount of people and bodies that need to do things, which like 10 people is a huge savings for these smaller companies. So like the roofing company, like they're using it from a cost saving standpoint. Like how do we use a tool to not have to hire more people? Because that directly hits the bottom line. Versus these larger companies, they don't care if they have the people or the tool, they can afford it.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting different way of looking at how the tools come in. I think that's why more smaller companies are driving so hard for it, is because it has such a big impact to their bottom line from a cost perspective.
What's also fascinating too is smaller companies have a lot less red tape. So they can move with a lot more speed and agility, and they can implement the AI a lot faster. So if they can act now and they can get ahead of some of these big companies, they can make a lot of gains, they can cover a lot of ground, but they just got to lean into it.
Especially while it's inexpensive. Because what's going to happen, my thinking, seeing other tools in the market, today it's $20 for the paid version of ChatGPT. Very soon it's going to be $100.
Don't tell me that.
Then it's going to be 150. Then it's going to be 200. It's getting like Netflix, right? It just keeps going up.
Look, I don't pay my Netflix bill. I'll let my husband pay that, so I don't know how much it costs these days.
Well, or you're like my home where everybody has their own. And then we have double subscriptions and then everything. It's like, well, you can bundle Hulu with this. I'm like, man, how am I gonna bundle with Verizon, with Disney, with everyone else keeps bundling? And now I got 5 versions of Hulu that I'm paying for, right? But I would say that my counter argument to that point, though, is that AI has made it so easy to create more tools, right? And then you have a lot of folks the average company, especially a smaller organization, doesn't need a significantly new or different large language model right now, right? And then you have other companies and countries that are pushing out models like DeepSeek and other things, right? I actually don't believe that the cost of intelligence is going to grow. I do believe certain companies will say, you really like Claude this much, or you really like ChatGPT, but what's going to end up happening is alternatives, right? Or small language models or open source models that are already out there, and people are going to start to refine them, right? And that's why I was asking earlier, like, was there some cost element? Because I could imagine that now you can create applications at a fraction of the cost. You could use something like Lovable and create a website quickly or an app, right? The thing that people don't really understand also about AI, what makes it, beneficial from a tech perspective, is you don't have to outline every use case. Like before, when we would work in technology, you needed to outline every edge case, right? And to your point, if someone was walking into to a home thinking that they were replacing a light bulb and it turned out to be some LED driver and some other things that they had to do, right? If you didn't build the application to know every single use case historically, you wouldn't been able to solve for that problem, right? But there's this concept in AI that they would describe as fuzzy input, fuzzy output. The AI is going to, you put in the input, it's going to boil down what's the sentiment of the question, but then it goes out and figures out what the answer should be. It doesn't need to be a preordained kind of decision tree that some coder or developer said, these are the things that you should do. Right. And so by default, it's cut down application development significantly because I don't have to solve for every use case. I only have to speak more in generalities, right? Now, thing two would be folks are just replicating technology. I always say this, there's no defensible moat anymore for most technology. And so to that point, I would argue that if you build an application for this today, I'm not saying this is a negative, but someone could just go online and say, oh, okay, for that use case, I'll build something similar. It doesn't stop you from getting the benefit, right? I do believe in the future, you're going to have a lot less general purpose software and a lot more hyper-personalized, either for you as an individual, right? Or you as a company, you as an industry, right? And so I think that's where people are going to start to really explore. And then I would say you give people binary choice, right? You can, yes, there's cost savings. And I'm sure that some of our viewers will say, all right, well, that just moved me from voice to the victim side of the equation. But what I would argue is that if you're a smaller company, if you don't do some of these things, the whole company might go down and everybody's done, right? And also for those entrepreneurs that I know a lot of folks that are in that kind of trade, kind of side of the house where they wish they could start up their own business. AI and all these tools allows more people to be able to do 1 to 5 person companies, right? More so than I've ever seen. I've never seen so many consulting companies pop up.
I know.
In the last 18 months. I was like, man, this is crazy, but it's also pretty awesome. That independence and that freedom that people, because I don't have to have a marketing team and a legal team and a sales team and a copyright team and this and that. I can get 80% of that, right? Enough to start my business. So
yeah, and it's funny. So back in 2020,
we don't talk about 2020. That was a rough year for the world.
well, but back then,
okay.
I would say, I was doing just some freelance consulting, and I worked with some startups just across the U.S. Right, and I was thinking about all the work that they were doing and all the things that they were paying freelancers and consultants to do for them, because there was nothing that they could leverage. And now I think back and I'm like, imagine if during that time they had a tool like this where they could say, instead of spending all that money that we don't have yet, because it was just all just negative revenue to them basically at that point, they could have not outsourced 80% of that and recognized some of that revenue back. And then they could have started growing their business better. Rather than saying like, all this is just expenses that we have to do to drive our business. They could have recognized that and probably grew a little bit faster. Or some of the ones that kind of died out too early probably could have still been around, pushing the envelope a little bit, which would have been interesting.
Yeah, a lot of people don't talk about that side of the equation, right? Everyone talks about the winners.
Yeah.
Right. You and I ran into each other a few weeks back at Adobe Summit, and I looked around, and one of the things I noticed, and I remember talking to other folks, I was like, there's a lot less agencies, smaller agencies here for the first time. All the big players were represented. And so you saw a lot less of the smaller mid-sized agencies, call it the 20 to 100 person companies, were very underrepresented for the first time that I've seen there. But what I did notice was there was a lot of, I would call them AI wrapper companies, companies that have wrapped some business idea or concept around this and called it software. And I would go booth by booth, and I would ask them, when do you plan on transacting? When do you plan on selling this company? And you're like, oh, we don't know. We're gonna create a sustainable business. I was like, there is nothing different about your business that 10 of these other folks could replicate. I would rethink that, right? I wasn't trying to scare them. I was simply saying, like, it is the Wild West. There's a lot of opportunity, but there's also the ability for basically anyone to start a company, which is good and exciting if you're curious. Yeah. Right. So I have a question about your organization in general, right? You're talking about use cases. You touched on this a little bit, but would you say across your organization, are folks more AI curious, or is it still predominantly anxiety driven?
It depends on which function you talk to, right? If you talk to the IT and the marketing side, very curious.
Right.
When you get into some of the operations side, it's very anxious. And the reason they're anxious is because I think a lot of the questions are like, could you build something where I don't have my job anymore? Right? Like, could you replicate what I'm doing from the phone call perspective to do that? Where like, the answer is always like, technically, probably. But at the end of the day, where the value you get from some of these jobs is the emotional connection people get with a person, right? And there's just certain functions that require that because it's almost like branding, right? Like there's not a whole lot to branding when you think about it on its most basic level, but it's an emotional connection that people get to a brand, like a Coca-Cola or things like that everybody knows. Like there's a connection when people hear the name to it. There's similar things in an industry like ours that you want a person, like a technician. I can't replicate that. A person has to come out and fix your tool, your platform or something. So there are things, so people I think they hear so much everywhere. And if you go, and just like anything online that you search for, you can find the good and the bad. So you're always reading both. And if you're curious, you weigh more towards the good. If you're anxious, you always weigh more towards the bad. So you're just taking your own level, like you're like expediting your thinking with whatever you can find to validate that. And I think that's what's driving people because there's no I don't think a lot of people know where the single source of truth is.
Yeah. What really flipped my mindset for me was when I heard AI will not take your job, but someone who knows AI will take your job. And that's what it was like, okay, now it's clicking. And then on top of that, I had someone say like, here's what you need to realize is like AI is never going to know your emotions. They're never going to know how you feel about something. They're never going to know your preferences. So you always have to have that human element on the other side. And for me, that was very grounding, right? Because I live more in the curious world. And it's like, I don't know how it's going to impact. But when I recognized that and as a core truth, it was like, oh, okay. It really moved me from more of that victim mentality into the voice mentality that we talk about. But my question for you, because we talk about this like good data, bad data, the good things, the scary things. When it comes to AI, and there's a lot of this good data, bad data, right? You get good data, you put good data in, you get good data out.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
Yeah.
How can we ensure, right? Or how can people who are more like AI anxious ensure that they are getting the good data? How can they tell?
I mean, there's two sides of good, right? It's the data that's the foundation of it and the trust behind that. But then it's also your prompt, right? You kind of touched on that, Greg, a little bit, but like back in the day, agencies used to do a thing a long time ago where they would give you a data report and they would change the date by a day to find it more green than red. And that was the report because you never wanted to show that you were doing something bad. It's very similar with prompts. Like if I kind of prompt it and lead the prompt to tell me what I want it to tell me,
Leading the witness.
I can get something that I want back to follow my hypothesis, right? Rather than just like being unbiased and saying like, this is my question, good, bad, or indifferent, give me the answer. And I think that's how a lot of people don't understand who use it, the intent of what they're really trying to do. They're trying to validate something they have in their brain rather than uncover a true answer. And I think the data foundation is the piece to that, but then there's also a piece on like education, where a lot of times like we're building some Microsoft Copilot agents to help people. And what we're actually doing is building the prompts into the agent so that 90% of the time, the people are just selecting the right prompt.
You're guiding them.
Right. So, because what you have to do is it's like muscle memory, right? Like as people start to learn how to do it in the way they should do it, then they start to act that way over time. Versus if you let them do it like a bad actor, right? Like that way, that's how they're always going to engage with it.
That's a very interesting way to get folks to adopt it. So basically, the parallel for ChatGPT, right, would be if you customize the GPT to then give some leading. Erica created a digital twin of herself. She calls Cheryl, and Cheryl has some kind of lead-in questions and prompts. Like a lot of times, folks see this blank command line. They don't know what to put in there, right? But if you customize the GPT, right, to say, here are the 5 starter things that you can do, what people will start to then understand is, oh, this is how I should be communicating to get the best response. So it's actually, you're kind of reverse reinforced learning. You're reinforced learning on the human versus on the machine. Like, hey, and I tell folks all the time, it's how you communicate with the technology where you're going to get the best results, right? And one of the stats I would always tell folks is the average historical Google search pre-Gemini was 4 words. The average Perplexity or Claude or AI search is over 22 words, right? That just shows you people are giving greater context. One of the The hacks, I was listening to a podcast recently, and I've been telling everybody, is like, I don't know why I didn't do this more, was instead of typing into, talk to it, because as humans, we are naturally trained to be more concise when we type things, right? But when you're free flowing and having a conversation, right, with something, you're just talking into your phone or you're in the car, you're going to give a way greater context. And what you will find is that you're going to get a much better output. So the data that you put in, add additional context, right? Add, to your point, add a screenshot or a picture of the thing that you're trying to do. Add additional color and say, hey, go do deeper research, or go search the web if you're using something that's connected to the web. Or, hey, do we have anything in our own knowledge base, right? If you're loading this up. So I think it's a very interesting way to get that literacy out there and get people to adopt it. And then the parallel would be in Gemini, they have their gems. But if you're in an organization, I like the idea, you're going to customize these so that it's easier for folks to adopt. Yeah. Like I'm way past people saying, oh, just be curious and play around with the toys. And they're like, I don't know where to start, man.
Yeah, it's an open world.
Yes. And so Cheryl is trained on my book and my body of work, and she's inside of my membership that I have. But in the beginning, I did just say, like, here's Cheryl. She's trained on me. Like, use her for help. Yeah. And everybody's like, but what does that mean? What do you mean ask her? Like, how do I talk to this person? So then we actually had an entire session where I walked them through the examples, and I gave them handouts, and I said, here's what you do if you're struggling with this, and here's what you're doing if it's more of, a problem like that. And now people are using her because I've given them the step-by-step guide, right? The cookbook for Cheryl. And so now people are leaning in. But what I've learned through doing this podcast, and what it's really helped cement it for me, is that, like, this is what's going to be in college degrees.
Right.
There are courses now on podcasting that would never have existed when I went to school, right? What are you even talking about? Okay, there's going to be courses on prompt engineering, and God knows how many courses on AI, but there will be entire degrees with AI. So it's like, we've got to lean in. But when you were talking about ChatGPT versus Google, I realized for me that Google has now become the new MapQuest. That's the only thing I go to it for now. Where am I going? I put it in the Goog.
Yeah.
Well, what's even funnier, and this is something I'd love to see a stat on, but like, when people Google searched, I guarantee no one wrote the word please in it.
Oh, absolutely.
But how many people are saying please in their prompts?
Oh, I'm very nice to Cheryl.
Right? Like, it's funny how people are engaging with it.
I say that to people all the time. There's this weird effect that's happening, because if you take any prompt engineering course, or if you start to just play around with it, you'll find that if you say please and thank you, you're going to get a more thoughtful response, right? Because it's basically reacting to how you're talking to it, right? It's trying to guess your tone. It's trying to figure out, right, how you're thinking about what's your sentiment. And so there's this weird effect where it's basically one of our early guests, actually, I think it was our first guest, she talked about, Lauren Greif, she talked about AI will reveal you. And people don't like sometimes when they look in that mirror, you start thinking about, why am I saying please and thank you to this machine? And my coworker on Slack, I was so, I was using all caps, and I was, paraphrasing everything, and I was just so disrespectful. Like, it starts to reveal you.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen the new trend on social media that's going viral? Of course you haven't. So you're supposed to ask ChatGPT, knowing everything you know about me, if you were my drunk best friend, how would you describe me?
Oh boy.
And then she spits out this amazing, oh my God, you're the best. I just love you. Wait. The world loves you. I don't know.
So you turn on the voice feature and listen to it.
You could.
This is like self-care with AI.
Yes, but
That is a whole industry.
I'm sure.
That is a whole industry of, they are calling, I think it's AI companions, right? Where folks are really leaning in, because what you'll find also is that people will divulge a lot more to the machine than they will their colleagues or coworkers. So they're going to be a lot more vulnerable. Right. Now, that's one of those things, though, where you also need to talk to your folks and just understand that, there's data behind that. Like, if you're in a company, technically you could see, some of those conversations. So that's going to be part, I think, in AI in general, whether it's internal folks or your customers, you have to be transparent that you're using it. You have to be, because what you'll see is that you'll get a lot more trust if you're open and honest about how you're using it or not using it. Right. And so it is my belief and my hope that if, again, folks lean into this much quicker and become the voice, right? And don't end up being the victim. I want folks to say, look, but we have to move past the abstract. We have to say, to your point, I love it. I think we're going to start to do that even at Walk West and say, here are some basic prompts. Here are how you use these, and then take them by function, right? All parts aren't equal. How HR uses it versus operations versus sales and marketing versus, the tech team could be radically different. The tools are very similar, if not the same, right? If you're a Google shop, then using Gemini makes sense. It's already tied into your Google Drive and Gmail and everything else, right? If you're a Microsoft shop, it's already tied into everything, Teams and, you name it, the whole suite of products, right? And so for me, again, it's like, give people more practical ways based on their function. One of the things I tell people all the time is like, if you want to start with it, tell it your role and tell it what you should be learning about to be more productive with AI in this role.
Yep.
One thing that people don't understand is it's very conversational. I use it for role playing. A lot of times when I go into a podcast like this, I say, given what you know about Tony, I've loaded all this information up. What are the 10 what are 10 questions I should ask? What are his likely responses? What are the 3 follow-ups I should give? I've gamed out the entire podcast before I even come into the studio.
Yeah.
Right. Now, it's not always 100% accurate, right? But at least I have some information and some thought as to what it believes, right? How you're going to respond or what it thinks about you. So
Yeah, it's like it's putting up guardrails, right? And like it's not going to be a 90 or 100% accurate, but at least gives you a guide, almost like a playbook, right? Of like, what could you expect rather than you thinking everything. Because if you don't go to it, your expectation is anything that's possible.
Yeah, we just talked about that off camera. So you can't just say everything, Greg Boone. I was like, okay. Yeah. So
you guide it, right? And I think that's critical. And to your point, like the whole, like one of the ways that I want to start using it eventually is creating synthetic audiences for our marketing team. Like this is the audience, and then you input your campaigns or something, and it tells you how that audience is going to engage with the thing that you're doing. We haven't gotten there yet, but eventually that's a place that I'm going to get to for them because that's really powerful.
100%.
I've done a little bit of that within my own chats. I have trained them on my language, how I speak, how I respond, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, all of those things. And then I game that out as well to say, like, what would their objections be to this?
Yeah.
Or where would they lean in? And the insights that it gives is so eye-opening because it's not necessarily something that I would think about, right? And again, the human element, sometimes I look at it and I'm like, absolutely not. That's not right, you know? But so you'll have to circle back with us when you get to that point. It's really interesting.
Well, it takes the biased viewpoint out, right? Like my favorite conversation in any business is when somebody tells me their viewpoint and I say, great, I don't care. And they're like, why not? I'm like, because you're not my customer. You're not paying money for our product. So your opinion, well, I appreciate it, really doesn't matter because it changes when you start to put money on the table for the thing that you're buying.
Yeah.
Right. So like people are still taking that approach when you're like, hey, how's this going to work with this audience? And they're like, well, I know it's going to do this way. And it's like, you don't know that.
Yeah.
Like you assume, you think based on educated guess, but if you could create that person at some sort of confidence level and then do it, now you might see something totally different than what you ever expected.
It's the context that both you give and that person has, right? I was when we were in Vegas, I was out at dinner with some friends and we were debating. I love to debate AI and folks. It's weird because there's this weird dynamic because all 4 of us at the table are using it, but 2 of us, not me, but 2 of us are like, I don't know about this and that. I'm like, you're using it. We talk about this every day. Right? What do you don't know, right? And people talk about the creativity and and humanity and this and that. And one of the things that comes up, right? So, for example, we're asking about wine choices. So they're asking our server about wine. And she said, you should try this wine. It goes great with that. Great. But and so I use that as an example. It's like, she only gave based on what, 1, she knew, 2, what they have in stock, and 3, what they're trying to sell, right? Versus I could have gone on ChatGPT or Gemini and say, given what meal I just ordered, what are the top, cocktails or wines that I should choose? Tell me why, blah, 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 right? I can become more educated. And the point I was trying to get across was just because I say I want to try new things and do things differently, not just based on what that one individual's their bias was, right? I want to know what the whole internet thinks is the best. And then I want to ask, do you have something that is similar? Or I'll ask ChatGPT. They say they only have these 5. Which one is closest to these things, right? But for me, I believe that this will allow us to experience a lot more of the entire world versus just what that person was hired. And I'm not knocking servers, I'm not knocking technicians, but if it's based just on that one individual's learnings, that's not acceptable anymore because we've now democratized intelligence.
So servers, they know how to tell you which wine to choose because there's an actual strategy to it. You can't choose the most expensive one because then you'll know I'm just choosing the most expensive one, so that'll get a better tip. So you choose like 2 or 3 down.
Correct.
But imagine this. So let's a step further on that, right? A lot of restaurants have this handheld thing on your table that you pay on. That's a device now. Build that into it. Get a couple of prompts about who you are, what you like. It takes your order, puts it in there, and then suggests the right wine for you. And then if it is the highest price one, more people are probably more likely to buy the higher price one because this tool prompted it to say, based on your needs and what you've ordered and what you are doing at this exact time and point, here are the things that you should try with this. They're probably more likely to pay a little more for that rather than some person just saying like, hey, you should have this thing that's sitting over there that's $700 a glass.
Yeah.
You know,
I sold it.
Yeah, exactly. Like cha-ching.
Oh my
The
God.
little bell goes off in the back.
Yeah.
They're like, someone actually bought it.
Well, we have talked a lot of ways about how we can use it, and we love to give our people tangible things. And one of the ways that we do this is through a fun little game called Last Chat. All right. This is where you pick up your phone and you open your AI tool of choice, ChatGPT, whatever, and you tell us what was your last chat.
Hey, we're going to all do it. So,
No, that's
we'll all
fine.
do it.
and this is when I get AI serious and I put on the shade. So we're going to go look through this now.
That works. I actually ran it this morning.
I love it. All right. You go first.
All right, well, let me get into it. Because I don't run it on my phone while at work, which you can imagine why.
Can I just say that every time I put these Meta glasses on, it tells me a different battery life, but it's not just, so it was 97%, then it was 75%, now it's 87% somehow.
You put it in your case.
So-
Your case charges it.
I did not. It was just been sitting here on
Oh.
my desk. So I'm very interested to see how this is.
Yes. So my last one. So this is something, and this is exactly a good use case for me. It is more task-based than anything. But what it is, so we do an IT leadership meeting every week where we talk about last week, next week, bullet points, just so the rest of the IT leadership knows what's going on. Every Monday morning, I have, through a Power Automate email that's sent out through Microsoft every Monday morning to my team about, hey, what'd you do last week? What do you plan to do? Just kind of get their thoughts on the week. I take that, put it into a prompt that I've saved, and has it generalize all the things for each of my lanes so that I can easy copy paste right into the IT leadership deck. So what used to take me 10, 15 minutes to fill out, now my team's doing the rest of the work and I can just do it. And the goal is eventually to actually have an agent, because I create some of the agents at my company, is to create one that my team goes into and actually just is prompted with those answers. And then it automatically outputs and I can sync it right to that page in that PowerPoint and it can just do it all for me.
Amazing.
Haven't got there yet, but that's a plan.
Quick question for you on this one, because I think a lot of the fear comes from, well, I don't know how to do that, right? And I'm not going to ask you to tell me how to do it, but what I want to know is how long did it take you to figure that out, right? And then how much, you've already talked about how much time it's saving you though. So we already know it's saving you 10, 15 minutes every week.
Mm-hmm.
How much time did it take you to learn that?
So I'm a different type of person, which Greg will probably tell you. I mean, I think one of his quotes for me was early on was, Tony's a rocket. He's going to blow up a lot of stuff, but he'll probably fix some of it. Right. And that's just because I go. So when I want to do something, I learn it. So I don't like to put things on other people at first. I want to learn. So I just put some time aside. It was a couple hours here or there just to watch some videos and learn about how do I create agents in Copilot and how do I connect those to Power Automate. Hour here or there for a couple of weeks while doing it at the same time. That's all I needed. Now I am a technical person, right? I've come that way, but that's how I learned a lot of things I did. Like I was never a developer, but I learned how to develop doing the same thing over time. And that's just kind of how I jump into things right away and just kind of immerse myself as much as I can to learn. Other people aren't like that, but I mean, it doesn't, a couple hours here or there, watching videos, trying it, failing, and learning is how I think people can learn pretty quick.
Love that.
So that's a good point. Watching videos, right? Again, he took out the abstract nature of it and watch. I do the same thing. I watch these videos and I take these courses and things, right? Because I want to see how someone's actually using it. And then my little hack is I listen to it at 1.5 or 2x speed. And as your brain starts to retrain itself, you can start to consume information a lot faster than people actually speak. And that's one of the things that folks don't pay a lot of attention to. All right, Erica, what's your last chat?
My last chat was actually just an email. I needed it to pull together to me. I spoke into it. I gave it the context because I was driving here and I just wanted to get this email done. And I gave it all the information, copied and pasted it, plugged it over to my Gmail, and sent it right off.
I have to say, I don't think I've ever actually sent an email that I drafted in
Real
AI.
time now. Oh, that you've drafted in AI?
I don't. I just don't. Like, I don't.
It's like blog posts that people write using AI. There are certain words that it outputs that is very non-conversational. And people can pick up on it pretty quick. Like, oh, that
I'm
was
not even
written
worried
in
about
AI.
that. I don't do it because, one, that's the one part where I want to keep as much humanity as possible, right? Now, if there's an attachment to my email, you best bet I used AI to help with it. But what I tell folks, I'm like, whether it's an AI or just a long-winded way to kind of write, I tell folks, I'm like, if you wrote more than 3 paragraphs, just assume I either didn't read it or I ran it to AI to summarize it,
Yes.
right? Because I'm not looking for you to write a book to send me an email. You could have called me or we could have done
And a lot of people use it for that. Like, here's my audience. Have what I written. Is it going to resonate or is it like too much? Like I have my team do that every now and again. Like I'm like, if you're writing to our CIO, run through ChatGPT and condense it.
Correct. I will do
Because
that. I'll take a long one,
Right.
a long email. It's like, now condense this.
Yes, because you've written too much.
So see, coming from the chief people officer lens, I'm like, always run it through and just be like, is this going to get me in trouble? Because I can't tell you
See,
how
that's
many
different.
people send me email. And I'm
Sometimes
like,
I
you
wanna get in
shouldn't have
trouble.
Put that in
Yeah.
writing.
Or I want the
Yeah.
person to know why I'm not happy, and ChatGPT is going to take that away.
Yeah, and like
no, I
digital
love it.
Erica is like, I don't think they want that smoke. So please stop saying this, Erica. Let me talk about mine real quick.
Let's hear
in
it.
the interest of time, I say, so I used it. So recently we had a podcast and we were talking about AI adoption and kind of in the workplace. So one of the things I used it for was, and Tony, you may know this recently, ChatGPT for like, there's this image generation moment that's happening between Gemini and ChatGPT and all the others. And so it's gotten really good at, one of the knocks was, why does it suck at text? I was like, well, before it was just painting and that wasn't really the big point. Like, how about the realistic photo? Like you're talking about the words are kind of jumbled. But anyway, they fixed a lot of that. So what I asked it to do is I said, generate a cartoon image that corresponds to each one of these questions for my podcast to express the emotion an employee would have. And then I gave it the 5 questions because what I wanted to do is I wanted to visualize, right, and create an infographic. So then I could use this later for a LinkedIn post or others and say, all right, these are the high level things that we were talking about. And so it made it a lot more fun. So there was a voice one where the image with the robot in the back, and then there's the corresponding question, there's a victim, right? So there was 5 different ones. They all have an image. Erica can see it, here. But it was really cool. The other part I was trying to just make sure folks understand, it's multimodal. There's a lot more that you can do with this. It's not just getting, text back. I can get an image, I can get a video, I was using the other day, I was preparing for a board meeting that's upcoming, and I was like, okay, put this data in here and put it into a table for me, right? So now visualization, right? What people are going to realize, and you were saying this, I think, a little bit earlier, is that these tools, you can do a lot more with them where you don't need necessarily a subscription to everything else that you used to have. You don't need necessarily to have to pull on marketing for something that you wanted to get out the door quickly or for an internal meeting. So there's just a lot of different ways. So it's not just about text. I would urge people to play more with the multimodal, the different form factors, both putting in and out. You can put images in and say, people will send me a PDF. I'm like, cool, I'm not reading all that. I drop it in ChatGPT. What are the headlines from this PDF? What should I take away from this infographic? Erica gave me 10 pages of things that was basically a book. What are the 3 things I need to focus on? Why is she being so snarky? Right. Those types of things.
Well, it's funny you say that, right? So recently, I have taken over enterprise data for my company. And one of the things I'm trying to do is re-architect our whole data infrastructure. And I had all these ideas of these new things, and I was reading all these articles with images. So I took all the images and threw them in there. And I said, here's my company. Here's what I want to do. I'll put the image of the ones that I shared that relates more to my organization and what's feasible through what I've done. And it created a model of the similar ones based on what I'm trying to accomplish. And I was like, perfect. Now that makes sense. Because I was trying to make sense of something I didn't understand.
Right.
And then it output something in a way that I could understand it. I was like, oh, this is easy. This is great. I don't need to read 90 more articles. I got it.
Incredible.
I told my chairman recently, he's like, hey, could you boil this document down, something that I can consume? I said, no problem. I say, please explain this as if I was in high school. And now I didn't tell him that. He may listen to this and hear it later, right? But there are ways that you can throttle it up. You can throttle it down, right? You can literally tell it, speak as if you're a dog, and it'll say roof, and it'll throw in these little corny puns throughout, right? There's just so much more that you could do.
Well, that's an interesting way to use AI. But one thing we do love to always end with is we ask our guest, what is one way in the next 24 hours that someone can just lean into AI a little bit more to move them from that anxious to the curious?
I like watching videos because it shows practical application. I think when people read articles, their minds can wander of like, well, how would I do that? And they start asking a lot of questions that make them more nervous. But when they watch a video, it's someone doing something with it that you cannot say, this is fake, because the person is doing it. They're showing you like, you want to create an agent? Here's how you do it. Step 1 through whatever, right? So I think watching videos is critical because then you can see that the thing you're trying to do is actually possible and people have done it. So it's not like this pretend thing in the world that someone is pretending like, everybody did AI everything and some of them were like dream state stuff, but some of them were real. So when you get in that world, it's difficult to understand which one applies to me. But if you have a specific use case and you watch a video, then you actually can see, oh, it's possible. Other people did it. And oh, this is how I do it. And then if they go do it, they're like, oh, this isn't as hard as I thought it was.
Right.
Because I think that's what holds people back. They're like, well, if I need to build an AI agent, I got to know code and deep language and this. It's like, no, you need to know how to write words.
It's natural language process.
If it will prompt you into how you want to do it, and then you write what you want, and guess what? You built something.
The easiest hack is to talk to it and then say, now make a concise prompt based on what I just said.
Right.
Yes. But that's great advice for the non-techie people out there who maybe it does feel a little scary. So get out there, find your video. Tony, thank you so much for your experience, your expertise. I'm just fascinated with how this is going to apply to your business. So I appreciate it.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on AI, Voice or Victim. If you want to stay competitive in the AI age, start now. Take one insight from today's episode and put it into practice in the next 24 hours. Make sure to follow us, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more actionable AI insights. See you next time.